I don't know, again, I guess it's just from an anarchist perspective, is you're just seeing kind of like, man, this is, the states in general keep doing things like this, and you wonder really, I mean, it's, again, it seems understandable, but if the atrocities just continue and continue, I don't know, it's kind of, well, it's not a question there, I'm sorry.
No, no,
Like,
you can issue objections. No.
Just thinking through, you know, kind of processing.
Yeah, and also, if you have fierce criticisms of the presentation, right, I mean, I was up front. I'm a Marxist-Leninist. I come down with Trotsky. I come down with the Bolsheviks. Issue any objections. I mean, you should. If you're an anarchist, if you are a leftcom, you should voice your objections for everyone here and everyone who will watch this. Like, I'm not at all critical of that.
I know you don't have an issue with this raising objections, but it just seems like, you know, I mean, these are, it seems like some of the reasons why people did become very disillusioned with the Soviet Union is that they thought, hey, this is going to usher in like a new era of peace, prosperity, etc., and liberty and freedom for workers, economic freedom, etc. And I mean, it just doesn't really seem like that was realized. You know, again, maybe the conditions were such due to these external threats, etc., that I mean, it was just no way to really have a really extremely good result to come from the Russian Revolution. But it just seems like, you know, the way things turned out, it wasn't.
Well, I mean, I would say three things to this, and I don't mean this as personal attacks, but they're going to come out that way, and if you want to take them that way, I completely understand. One is we need to exercise an incredibly high level of moral sophistication. Here's the thing: Saddam Hussein, George W. Bush, and now Barack Obama, and the Tsar, right, all engage in atrocities. Horrible, monstrous atrocities. Hitler, etc., etc. Okay, but there's a fundamental quality of difference and character of the atrocities committed, both in type and intent, of the Bolsheviks and all of the capitalist and imperialist powers. Barack Obama, even on his busiest day, lives incredibly well. The Bolshevik bureaucratic elites, who were the new bourgeois, in some cases literally worked themselves to death. Lenin is a good example of this. They lived in absolute austerity. They were constantly fighting and building new policies and organizing. And so, I mean, even Saddam Hussein, yeah, Iraq wasn't magnificent, but he had plenty of palaces, right? Saddam Hussein says he's defending Iraq, right, from foreign invasion, etc., etc. Saddam Hussein is defending Saddam Hussein. As a matter of fact, the Bolsheviks didn't get much out personally of the revolution. And most of them suffered immense hardships, threats of imprisonment, threat of death, in order to do this. And I think that's significant. It would be one thing if George W. Bush were leading the Iraq War from Iraq as a literal commander-in-chief on the ground, engaged in house-to-house, street-to-street fighting. Would it necessarily make it moral? I don't think so. Because why would he still be there? Right? For liberty, for freedom? No. For corporations. But I think this is an important moral distinction to make. There were really bad things done in the Soviet Union. But by and large, entirely, throughout the entire time of the Soviet Union, the only time that any communist got significant benefits from being a communist leader was when the Soviet Union dissolved. They used their political influence and power to buy up the state industries and then get rich off of that. But for the vast majority of the Soviet Union, they lived in incredibly austere conditions. And so I think that a level of moral sophistication is required to make this distinction. Whereas apparently, right, the atrocity of, I mean, to put the example more clearly, well, if a suicide bomber blows up a bus and an Israeli helicopter blows up an apartment building, what's the difference? It's the same thing. You're just killing people, right? Just people who have lives and families. But I think in this instance, right, it's clear there's a strong moral distinction. Unfortunate. The suicide bomber in Israel is maybe not doing the right thing. And I'm willing, retroactively, we don't live in worldwide global communism. And if Leninism alone was sufficient, we would be. And I don't think it is. And so it's a failure. And that sort of the moral atrocities committed need to be weighed into that, right? For the fact that women now had education, that literacy rate went from, you know, the 20s and 30s to nearly 100%. The fact that the Soviet Union went from being absolutely destroyed by foreign powers to stopping Hitler. Yeah, okay, those are all good. But yes, I would admit, right, there needs to be a calculus, or at least an understanding, a moral calculus, if not like a calculus of suffering, that is sophisticated enough to account for these things. And the second, of course, would be historical instances. The sort of rebellion, I have no problem. Well, let me phrase it this way. I have a significant problem with the United States using COINTELPRO to suppress the Black Panthers. I have very few problems with the federal government or state agencies using state power to suppress white Aryan resistance. Now, fundamentally, there's no universal appeal to morality that I can use to make that distinction. However, I think that as moral agents, in a historical context, we are obliged to look at the historical context and program of the Black Panthers that were suppressed by the state and the white Aryan resistance that was suppressed by the state. And in this case, even the Macnabists, even the Kronstadt. I mean, this becomes the challenge to anyone who is critical of the Bolsheviks. What would Russia look like without the Bolsheviks? Let's imagine the Kronstadt was successful. Let's imagine Makhno was successful. What would that sort of society look like?
German.
Most likely it would have been, yes. That's the facile assertion. But also, you'll notice that a lot of this is, I mean, if I can just return to the resolutions, just two ones real quick. Let's see. Okay. One is 15 to permit free handicraft production by one's own labor, and 11 to give peasants full freedom of action in regards to land, and also the right to keep cattle on condition that the peasants manage it within their own means without hired labor. I mean, this, I think, is clearly petit bourgeois socialism, which is to say, not capitalist, not fully bourgeois, but the idea that we should all be little capitalists, right? We should all work for ourselves, we should all own our own businesses, we should all own our own farms, and as long as, you know, we do that, it doesn't matter if we exchange and trade, and we maybe gouge prices here and there. And so, right, this sort of, even if the Macnabists had been successful, even if these peasants had been successful, even if these anarchists had been successful, I don't think that we would have seen anything unique or special or remarkable in the Soviet Union or the Anarchist Federation of Russia that would have been any better than anything that left populists in the United States were advocating for through homesteading. And some people support that, right? And we're non-tendency, and if that's your idea of socialism and that's what you want, okay, that's fine. But that's also not, it's not theoretically and it's not practically good enough for me. And so in the historical context, there's no reason to support these anarchist or worker rebellions because they didn't offer any substantive, you know, addition. And then the third thing is this. If you're going to raise, and I mean this absolutely, and I'm deadly serious about this. If you're going to talk about a revolution, if you're going to talk about a rebellion, and if you're going to take arms against the legitimate government, you better be damn well willing to follow it through to the end. The Bolsheviks were willing to do that. They were willing to do it twice. Once in the July days, once in the October Revolution. The Kronstadt workers were not willing to do that. And ergo, the Kronstadt workers have no legitimate mandate to lead anyone for any reason. Had they won, and we had the worker, you know, the global worker left-com council communist world, I would be a Kronstadt supporter. If Trotsky had won, I'd be a Trotsky supporter.